This is to transform the way Formula One delivers its race experience.
Reliable connectivity from the Tata Communications service team has made it possible of transferring media content from race locations worldwide.
Tata Communications has been such an important partner over the past seasons. It's been a winning partnership both on and off the track.
Tata arrived in Formula One at a time when the teams were recognizing that they wanted to look at how they could become a lot more efficient. We're going through this period of digital transformation. We have to be very aware that people watch things in different ways now, on mobile device or on iPad. That is the way people are engaging with their passions. One of the great opportunities in Formula One is to be bi-directional in the way we put the information out there and then we get a response from the fans. The Connectivity Innovation Prize has been a really great initiative.
We must come together to develop the technologies of the future. What's your F1? Congratulations to Tata Communications for 150 races in Formula One.
The consistency of service is what makes Tata Communications trusted to win.
So if we can do it for Formula One, we can pretty much do it for anyone else.
Here to discuss sports sponsorship beyond the game, please welcome Giles Morgan and Mihir.
Everyone's sitting comfortably. Can you hear me? Good. What a great video.
Thank you.
You can always tell good sponsors by the quality of their montage films, I find. Mehul has got a pretty cool job. He's been, I think, at Tata Communications since about 1850, since the firm was started. If you look at his CV, it's so technical, I only understood one word in about 4 of it. And I learned a new word yesterday, which is petabyte, which I had no idea, but there's also a thing called an exabyte,
yes,
which is even more bewildering to me. So this may be the most intelligent man I've ever had the privilege to interview. But we're here to talk about sponsorship, which is not always about intelligence. Perhaps it's even about a bit of humanity and having some experience in humanity with real people. Congratulations on your Formula One sponsorship. I think you've done 150 races over 8 years.
Yep.
Amazing. Start off, has it been worth it?
Absolutely. Every single moment of it. When we got into the sport, and to give you a little background, Tata Communications as a company, we are a B2B company. We power about 25% of the world's internet routes. So you can imagine we are underlying fabric to a lot of things that are happening in the digital space right now. I couldn't have been more pleased with the panel earlier because I think every third word was data. Right? And that fundamentally was the opportunity that we spotted, that as we build our brand and as we see sports transforming, what's the role that we could play in that transformation? That's what got us into the Formula One journey. So we work with Formula One, we work with Mercedes, with the Williams team, with a whole bunch of broadcasters, and essentially with the single-mindedness of how do we improve fan experiences. Because as you probably heard, if we can do it for Formula One, then we can take the same experiences and take to other customers, whether you're in banking, whether you're in manufacturing, because everywhere you want to reach out to new markets, you want new services to be launched, and you want great customer experience.
And so were you ahead of the curve when you announced the sponsorship in 2012, I think it was. You're obviously a tech guy, a science guy. You understood this was coming. Tata Communications has been building. Was the Formula One decision based on actually your paradigm of what the future was going to be then?
So I would like to say that we had really thought it through, but the reality
I
is...
built you up as the most intelligent person, so you may as well take it.
So I don't think we really knew exactly where we will take it to. What we did know is that Formula One has all those ingredients. And I think in any sponsorship, you want to look at, are the ingredients right? Because how you will exploit it, how the sport will work, how a new personality will come through in the form of a driver or an athlete who will take the sport to a different dimension, you never really know. And you can't plan for that. What you plan for are the ingredients right? So Formula One was a lot about technology. It is global. It goes to pretty much every part of the world. And the good part was, and I say it good now, is that at that point of time, they weren't doing too much on the digital journey. So it hence became a nice place for us to come and experiment, right? So frankly, we went in there with that spirit of innovation, with that spirit of saying that we'll try and do new things and see how we can then form our brand from there.
And we're living in this tech revolution, and the previous panel, who weren't going to be nearly as good as this one, I'm sure. Owen Lead had pink socks.
You're the best moderator.
That's a fine. That's a fine. But I'm interested. We live in this tech revolution. All our lives are changing all of the time. And when I was involved in sponsorship at HSBC 150 million years ago, the real metrics were about TV evaluation, they were about hospitality, they could be a few other metrics, but it was pretty vague. Now with digital engagement, now with the data that's available, being harvested properly, the sponsorship world, it seems to me, has been turned absolutely on its head. Even in the last 2 years, there's just this fast revolution. Because of that revolution, and even though you're a crystal ball soothsayer guy who can see ahead of the curve, would you say that your sponsorship objectives and metrics have changed even in the last 2 years because of the advancement of that technology?
No, absolutely. Absolutely. You're spot on, right? And with the richness of experience we've had, you've seen how the curve has moved in sponsorship. I think the business outcome significance and marrying what you do in sponsorship back into business outcomes is now that much more needed and that much more stronger, right? Because the consumption patterns have changed. The traditional model that you could do badging and get it done, and it was right at its point of time, no longer work, right? And brands now have purpose-driven brands which want to relate to a certain cause, certain brands which we want to drive business outcomes in terms of new business, certain places where you want it to be innovation. So that tight interlock with business outcomes, and what we heard on the earlier panel also, the amount of data which is now available, right?
And so do you think that the best sponsors are those that have those clear business objectives pre-investment and then deliver against those?
Absolutely. I think.
And do you shift your objectives then even on a 6-month, 12-month basis as things move on, as technology moves on, given that you're at the heartbeat and the rock face of technology?
Yeah, absolutely. I think there has to be a relevance for why you sponsor a particular property. That property could be the best in the world in terms of whatever other statistics. Are you relevant in it? Do you have a role to play in it, right?
And is that the way, it's Formula One, we've obviously got it happening this weekend. It's one of the great showcase sports in the world, all those cities around the world. But also it attracts a lot of sponsors, even as much as this event, actually, which seems to have quite a lot of sponsors. I noticed of the thanks to all the sponsors. But Formula One, number 2 to all that matters in terms of number of badges. How do you rise above? I mean, you've got your segment, that's clear, but given that everybody is looking for share of eye, voice, data, whatever it may be, how do you go about that?
Yeah. See, I think one of the best things with the digital revolution and transformation has been targeting, right? If you're able to figure out who exactly you want to talk to, and then extract that particular value from the sponsorship. So Formula One in our earlier years, we weren't even seen on the track. So a conventional model, and that is what it was, where it was all about your logo on the racetrack, we weren't even seen by anybody. But we elevated it by doing technical experiences, taking people behind the scenes, right? The mystery of what happens to that action, and that mystery actually build association for us, right? So it's finding those little nuggets which are then spot on relevant to you.
It's interesting. I mean, the Olympics for a long time has used the non-visual approach to sponsorship, and it's about the association. And I agree with you that modern sponsorship, you could almost see where sponsors don't even need the branding rights because they've got the digital rights which allow them to communicate. It makes me laugh because HSBC used to sponsor the Jaguar Formula One team, which I stopped, which was not that popular. But it was often said, because the car crashed so often, it would be better to brand the chassis of the car. It was just being lifted off the track so often. It reminds me, but that was my Formula One experience. So you've talked a little bit about the innovation, the showcasing, that something like Formula One, which is this extraordinary circus of wizardry and requirement and communication. So in a sense, it's the ultimate showcase for you that can be applied to other things. So it helps you tell your story of Tata Communications and justify the investment that you make, which is significant. So my question as a former sponsor is, you've been doing it for a long time. 150 races is amazing. 8 years is amazing. How do you keep it interesting? How do you avoid repetition?
Absolutely. And that's a perpetual challenge, right? So we've actually followed that path of saying, how much more future-looking can we be in our storytelling, right? So you probably saw about the innovation prize, where we discussed things like augmented reality, virtual reality, even before they actually became commonplace to talk about. And it's always about elevating the conversation, right? And you're spot on. Any property, actually, every year you have to keep looking at, will it be relevant next year?
Yeah.
So.
And good activation, good activation follows good objective setting and that attention to detail. And I'm sure you've got a million. You must have a lot of VIP passes this weekend. Can you get into everything?
None.
Is there any way you can't? Can you get into a car?
All access pass.
Do you get one of those?
No. I won't fit into a car.
I want his job.
I have too much to fit into a car.
No, the trouble is, I wouldn't understand that since I only know what a petabyte was last night. So you've had all of this success. But inevitably, and I share some of this, is it doesn't always go according to plan. Yeah. Sometimes you have bad days. Just maybe for levity, have you had some howlers, some really bad sponsorship days where you've gone, everything that could have gone wrong has gone wrong, and are you prepared to share that?
How good is the audience in keeping secrets?
Well, they may be awake, so...
No, see, what happens is that when you try and pivot so strongly towards a value prop rather than badging, you have to be prepared for risks, right? Because fundamentally we deliver services and then we want to talk about it, there is no way that you don't plan for a backup and a backup to the backup, right? So we've had our moments, right? And it happens when you're 8 years, 150 races, just like a car can crash, there are things that can go wrong. I think it's all about preparation and anticipating for that uncertainty, right? So the uncertainty that you heard on the earlier panel about what is needed for the fans, we try and minimize that uncertainty internally. In fact, every race weekend, while we want the racing action to be great, we wish our team a boring race, right? We want them literally to have a boring race in terms of everything is working fine. So a lot of checks and balances. We've had issues as well, but it's always been something that we've mitigated for the fan at the end of the day.
And it's interesting because you're involved with both teams and obviously the circuit, which means you're covered in a sense.
Yeah.
I remember a golf tournament that Tiger Woods once played in with HSBC. It's the only time I did this. It was such an error. But you talk about howlers. Tiger came along to the event, and it was the World Match Play at Wentworth. And it cost an awful lot of money. Most expensive round of golf ever, in fact. And he got knocked out on the first day. And I remember the CEO calling me up and saying, what exactly was that all about? Thinking that could be the end of my career. So actually, it's a nice segue into golf. You do sponsor other properties. Yes. You do MotoGP. Yeah. You do the European Tour. Two questions is, one, why? Given that you've got the ultimate showcase, I guess, in Formula One, do you need to do any more? And in MotoGP is related. And the European Tour, which is obviously quite a different animal, Is it just you wanted a bigger train set, or what was
more little memoirs out there?
Yeah. But what was I mean, I'm getting to know you quite well.
Yeah.
There was a strong business rationale. What was that?
Yeah. See, what happens is we try and always look at what's the pinnacle of the sport, and everyone wants to be associated with that. Now, golf in its own way is a very amazing sport, right? The opportunity for storytelling on digital is actually much more, because you have 4 days of so much of content, right? And on linear TV, what you're seeing is probably 1/10 or 1/20th of what actually is available. So the opportunity to bring in digital and the opportunity to transform it is actually quite stupendous. So kind of you look at it that when you also are talking to your own end customers, somebody is a leader in their space, somebody is a challenger, or somebody is actually growing at a different place. So how do you actually work with different sets? And to your earlier point about the human and the emotion, the relation that you get back with your target audience is good, because they see you as somebody who's able to work across various things rather than just one thing which is probably good and playing up on.
And I mean, the golf guys, presumably, that they would not be nearly as technical as the Formula One guys. Does that make them easier to work with in a sense? Do you get to control much more?
You never get to control anything. That's a problem. But I think they're fabulous people. I think they really want to embrace change. And I think, and hence, the partnership with them has been fantastic.
And do you think that the European Tour, or golf in general, is embracing change as a sport? Do you think they're waking up to the need to move into a kind of the next generation?
Oh, absolutely. So if you see, European Tour has introduced the Golf Sixes, right? Which is a 1 hour, literally like a shootout, played down to timer, played down to music. I think that's the T20 version for people who follow cricket of what they're doing. And all of that is giving opportunities of how much more we can do with them.
Okay. So, again, the last panel was interesting as well. We're seeing an immense amount of change in sports consumption, I guess. Given that you're putting down all the cable, how many times around the world does it go? 19 times around the equator. I'm learning so much this week. It's brilliant. Looking ahead, because we've identified that you are the Mystic Meg, you see into the future. What is do you think is the TV landscape for how we consume sports in, say, 15 years' time? Again, we grew up with the same sort of age. He's a bit younger, and it was linear. It was straightforward terrestrial TV, maybe a few channels, etc. Now, fast forward, we're through OTT, etc. What is television in 15 years' time, do you think, from a sports perspective?
I personally believe that the minute you think of TV as a piece of hardware, actually many more opportunities open up, right? See, experiences of consumption of sports are happening at 4 different kinds of experiences, right? One is an experience sitting at the venue. And whether it's a racetrack or whether it's a stadium or an arena, your experiences there have to be enhanced, right? And not just about the sporting action, everything else that you do around it. The second is your experience at home. And while a lot of us might want to do it on smaller devices, the larger device of a television, I think, will continue to play a role. And smart sports, smart content aggregators will always look at how to exploit it. I think Netflix has exploited a lot more with that standard television rather than actually even what they've managed to do with the mobile. So that becomes a second audience. Then there are audiences which are on the move, right? And how are you going to get them to consume stuff? And then clearly micro experiences. So TV will continue to play a role in this. It will add, it will create a lean back and relaxed thing, a communal thing where people come together and do stuff together. But yes, the conventional TV of just linear TV, that's
and does that excite you, the changes that are coming in the way that consumption is happening? Are you excited about the future of sport?
Absolutely. I think sports is something that is way beyond even what we do with other content plays, because there is the human element of it. There is performance. There is things like, things that they can do which we can't do, right? What we heard on the earlier panel, why people watch so much of Twitch, because, I mean, look at even Formula One. Only 20 people can be at the racetrack or driving the car. All of us are virtual fans. So I think sports is clearly the place to be.
And have you got over India not making the World Cup final?
Let's not go there. Yeah, but I think the final was fantastic. We couldn't have scripted it. It was a Bollywood movie.
So do I. Well, look, we could keep going, but we've got a fantastic panel. So I'm going to welcome the panel if they come up onto the stage. What we've got is we've got two sort of brand guardians from Jones Lang LaSalle and from MoneyGram, and from two agency gurus from DDMC, Fortis and Dentsu. So let's see what they've got to say. Please welcome Kimberly, Patrick, Cooney and Sabrina. Now you've got the dream team. It'll all happen now. So we've been talking a lot about, obviously, how this whole world is changing, and I definitely feel I'm a dinosaur in the sponsorship world now, learning all about how technology is moving on. And clearly, sponsors and rights holders are looking now to try and connect in every way they can, virtually and physically, through new channels and platforms. So Patrick, I'll start with you. You're in a hot seat right now in Asia. You're selling a fantastic property throughout Asia with AFC. How are you approaching sponsors now? You're like me, you're a dinosaur. You've been doing this game for a long You've been doing it for a long time. Yeah. You're now going to market with, I would imagine, a new set of rights which cover both the physical and the virtual. Yeah. How are you seeing that, and how is it beginning to sell? What's the kind of feedback from the investment market?
Well, as it relates specifically to the product that we're working on, which, as you say, is the Asian Football Confederation, our biggest advantage, which is the fact that the events take place from the Mediterranean to the Pacific and Mongolia down to Australia, our biggest advantage in many ways is also our biggest disadvantage, because the patch is just so big. And our predecessors, Lagardère Sports, are running actually a very successful sponsorship program at the moment, but it's one that basically is quite uniform right across the whole of the Asian territory. So what we've really wanted to do, and what we're in the process now of marketing, and I think marketing very successfully, is a product that actually allows sponsors to both operate at a global, or if you like, a regional level, if that's what they want to do, and many brands do, like Toyota at the moment. Cooney-San's colleagues are obviously marketing that for Lagardère Sports. Very successful, want to market on a regional basis. But we also want to be able to essentially take advantage of some very, very strong regional markets, for example, China, Japan, the Middle East, Southeast Asia. So what we're going to be doing is we're going to be introducing virtual signage on a very large scale right across the region, which I think is a huge innovation. We had some interesting conversations earlier on about how we're going to be executing that. And in very simple terms, we're going to allow brands to as I say, either take a global, regional position, or to be able to only advertise or promote in China, in Japan, in the West or Southeast Asia. So for us, it's really going to be about bringing a much more customized solution to the sponsor, but being able to do that through technology that's just coming through now.
So a tough question, because you're starting on the beginning of this journey. Do you think sponsorship is easier to sell now because of the technology that's available?
Well, I think that's, you referred to me as both yourself and myself as dinosaurs. When I started off in Asia in 1993 selling the China Tennis Open, the only thing that people were really focused on is whether it was on CCTV5 or not. And then, as you say, what sort of hospitality went along with that. There was very little activation. It was actually very difficult to activate in China back in those days. Now there's no question whatsoever that the sponsors are looking for a lot more than that. Of course, the eyeballs, the television is incredibly important. I'm actually someone who still strongly really believes in television, and I think it'll be there for a long time. But really what they're looking for is much greater value, and to be able to take a lot more out of sponsorship. And you can do that more now, which is why I think the answer to your question is yes. Yes, it is.
But Kimberly, I would ask that, well, actually to Sabrina first, if I may. You represent MoneyGram, massive sponsorship with cricket, which has been very successful, I know. What Patrick's just said is, do you look for a lot more quantitative and qualitative data from potential rights holders to help you make your investment decisions?
Yeah. So first of all, just spend a few words on what MoneyGram is about, because we are a global money transfer provider. So we have agent partners across the globe, and we partner with physical locations, agent partners, as well as we have our own channels, online channels. So the approach that we take It's really omni-channel. And one of the key sports that we have been associated with is with ICC Cricket. We have actually been associated with them since 2009, and we have extended our relationship.
That is, England are the world champions, just so everybody is very clear about it. England are the world champions. Carry on, please.
Yes, absolutely. Actually, it took me a while for me to understand the game. And while working with the company, I really came to understand it, because in the beginning, I didn't know what is a toss and what is a bowler. So maybe I can share with you also some of the, it is a very good sports collateral that we sponsor, but I think more importantly is why we are doing that, because we are looking at the World Bank figures, the remittance market, 25 to 30% are targeting the South Asians. So why we associated ourselves, or MoneyGram brand, with cricket is all about our target audience. So we have a sender. It's a two-pronged approach. We have a sender who might live in UK, he might live in Australia, from India, and then he or she needs to send money home. So we always will activate activities on the ground from what we call the receive side. So in India, using 2016, when we first started, and the game was in India, so we have actually activated a bowler challenge. We call the Go Challenge. So we activated on ground competition in the very rural areas. It's kind of a competition, and then we bring it across India, and then beyond India, we brought it to Sri Lanka and also Bangladesh. So over 100 cities, we built this bowler challenge. So at the end of the game is we wanted to unite our consumers, which is our receivers living in the far-flung areas, to connect them with the game that they love. So, and then we also had the chance for them, of course, to see the actual game and matches, which could be a lifetime for them within India. So that was what we found it very successful. Of course, you can talk about the data. Of course, we have customers' engagement and so forth. And of course, nowadays, there's a lot of social media, how we can share and measure about the media values and so forth. But we do believe that it is a good asset, sports that connect to our consumers. And we, in fact, have continued our association.
I'm sure the ICC are delighted to hear to hear that. Kimberly, you represent a B2B brand currently, Jones Lang LaSalle, but you've also been in B2B for a long, long time in your career with HP, I know in particular. And obviously talking to Mehul earlier, which is a B2B sponsorship. How have you used in any of your iterations of, in terms of good B2B activation that you've seen over your career that have really worked? Because it is a bit different from B2C. And obviously for rights holders or representatives of rights holders, it's adjusting the pitch depending on the business need.
I think even before the activation, if you are specifically in B2B, because you are very targeted in who you're trying to reach, you have to make sure that you can reach that target in a very, very personalized way. You're not going to go to the mass market. So for us, and a previous sponsorship that we did with Formula E, it was very important to us as a B2B provider that we only sponsored a team where we were actually providing a solution, and it was around data analytics and what we could do for that team in terms of really helping them perform better. And I think that kind of flows into what we're doing at JLL. We have not chosen to sponsor a big sport or a particular event. It is about sponsoring individuals in a sport where they have unique stories of ambition that kind of align. So I think there's a lot of data. Everybody's talking about data. They certainly talked about it in the last panel. To me, it's not about the data, it's about the insights. And if you're not able to leverage those insights into better engaging and providing good content, a good story to align to their business outcomes, not your personal business outcomes as an organization, but you have to be able to show from a B2B perspective how what you're doing or that sport actually is contributing to whether you call it a fan or somebody else, their outcome.
It's the metaphor of sponsorship to tell your story.
It's got to be emotive. It's got to really touch the heart. And those are the ones that are most successful, regardless of whether the activation is online and offline. which should have both?
Well, it's interesting. I've said this before, and I always think that generally sponsors tend to be commoditized, quite boring businesses. And the associations they make tend to be the way that they humanize and try and create an audience and create some sort of allegiance. And the sponsors who fail to bring it to life, whether it be B2B or B2C, are missing. They shouldn't do it at all if they're not that. Kuni, I'm interested. I mean, everybody's talking about Japan. In 3 days, I think the Rugby World kicks off, and it will come as some surprise. But if anyone wants to put a few quid down, Wales are going to win the World Cup this year. I've had it said. That represents the Welsh side of my family. But I've seen some wonderful, wonderful stuff going on that the organising committee have done, learning national anthems. I know from the Welsh, which 15,000 people in the stadium. Huge amount of excitement about to kick off in Japan, and then next year the big one, the Olympics returns after whatever it is, 56 years in Tokyo. I mean, one, you must be very proud and very, very excited, but also with your Dentsu hat on. Is this the most exciting you've seen the Japanese market? And our sponsors, they seem to be responding in absolute droves in terms of investment. And if so, how's that changed from 10, 15 years ago?
Thank you very much. I think a lot of people now I'm personally proud of Japan finally to able to host the Rugby World Cup and Olympics, Summer Olympics next year, because of last 10 years as Japan's market, also Japanese brands has less spending, and also economy is not really strong. So therefore, I personally really having a tough time to setting sponsorship to the brands, because a lot of brands didn't believe in the sponsorship. So therefore, I personally don't say a sponsorship, I call partnership. I try to change the way to approach to the brands, because sponsorship sounds like unilateral, you know. This is sponsorship, one-way communication. But partnership is more like unilateral, so interactive. This sounds like interactive. And also, sponsorship itself is totally changed 10 years ago and now. When I came first time to Singapore 2005, I was in charge of the Asian football. I was the World Sports Group as a senior vice president. That time was very simple. The sponsorship of branding, eyeball, visibility, a little bit ticket, and the sponsor was quite happy. But now it's really changed, especially if you see the Olympics next year, 2020, Summer Olympics. It's very obvious Olympics is not about branding, because there's no branding at all. As of today, 63 sponsors, domestic Japanese sponsors already signed for Olympics for next year without any branding. So I question myself, why sponsor 63 companies already signed up for the Olympics next year? The Olympics is there 311 days to go, which is less than 1 year. So next year I'm here, I talk about more what happened in the Olympics, but only 311 days to go.
But that's interesting. You talk about that obviously the Olympics, there is no branding. You're talking about a world of virtual branding, which is pretty cool. And you're talking about a world which says we're not that worried about our brand being visible because that's not why we're doing it. In a sense, this is the proof point of why sponsorship works, is if you've got your channels right and you've got your association right, you're telling the stories without worrying about the visual logo or I maintain no one in the history of the planet has ever bought a mortgage because they saw a perimeter board on the side of a football field. And if they do, they're mad. Why would you? Why wouldn't you go into a bank and have a relationship? Yeah. So I'm really interested, it seems to me, to my earlier question, that sponsorship is growing up because of technology, because the stories that it's telling, which is the narrative, is being taken through the channels of the sponsor to deliver the value rather than just through the eyeball of television. Would you agree?
Absolutely, and absolutely. While earlier the sport itself was a media, because that's where you could place your logo, this is now becoming all about storytelling through your own channels, through digital channels. And this is a proof point, right? That if you can get 63 sponsors without branding, you've actually nailed it in that sense. So completely.
So they've set the bar. Well, you set the bar in Japan, 63. So, Patrick, how many are you going for?
Okay, so actually the real reason we're doing localized 4 local streams, including one in Japan, is because we looked at the 63 sponsors that Dentsu have on the Olympics. Our rights just commence immediately after the Olympics finish, and we decided we've got to go after those 63 sponsors. So we actually are targeting, actually in partnership with Dentsu, to try and bring a lot of those guys onto the AFC program. But look, in terms of our responsibility as agents, I think what we really need to do is it's our responsibility to come up with fantastic marketing platforms and to really help to build that marriage. I think you were the person I heard describe sponsorship as a marriage in previous years.
Yeah, but I've been married twice.
Me too. But that's what we need to do. It's really for us to be the people who build these incredible programs, really understand exactly what it is that sponsors are looking to try and achieve, and then work in an extremely collaborative fashion to deliver that, yeah?
Well, I think what's interesting, so I know that Kimberly is doing their JLL involved with climbing, which is a narrative and an ability, but it's also, I think, it used to be in the sort of 101 sponsorship college that doesn't really exist, which is this thing called ambush marketing. But it does feel to me that one of the dangers, if that's the right word, of traditional sponsorship, is that you can try and own rights as a rights holder to an extent and own certain intellectual property. But if you want to do climbing, which can be climbing buildings or whatever people are doing in your world, you're going to have nothing to do with the Olympics directly, but you will be able to tell Olympic-style stories which aren't ambush in a negative way. They're just stories about people using a happening.
Well, I think, we're starting to have conversations because we are sponsoring climbing, which is going to be a new Olympic sport in Tokyo 2020. So we're never going to be on a global scale and be an Olympic sponsor, at least not in the next, 5 years. But that shouldn't stop us to look for opportunities in Tokyo around that activity with all those people in town that relate to us and climbing without impinging on the Olympics. So we're starting to have conversations about that. We're talking about sponsorship, but I don't think big sponsorships are always the answer. And to your point, the sophistication of sponsorship and being able to cherry pick, or make choices based on your requirements as an enterprise, as your requirements for your clients, things like that. The days of, $500 million global sponsorships to participate in the Olympics are gone, right? Most companies, even large companies, don't have those kind of budgets. They're few and far between. So the ability to use technology and data and be very targeted and do ambush marketing is a great opportunity for us.
Yeah. And if I may add to that, see, it also depends on what element of that sport do you really want to drive home for your messaging, right? If the element of the sport is that you want to associate with the personality within it, right? That's where you probably have to go and do an athlete sponsorship, or you do a team sponsorship like Mercedes, and we can hence leverage Lewis Hamilton. But if the element that you would to look at is just the raw emotion of that sport, and if you can then do a nice storytelling, you may not even need to sponsor it, right? You're just tapping into that emotion, and that's what probably in climbing, because you're just tapping into that emotion of human success, right? Taking that.
And it does seem to me that the sponsors who get it most right, and we can talk about who are good sponsors, are the ones that spend the time and take the effort to get to know the association, be it in sport or music or entertainment or whatever it may be, but try and get under the skin rather than just to be a badge, which would be the old-fashioned expression, and to actually show empathy. Are you seeing in Japan some of the sponsors, particularly where I know rugby has been going for a long time actually in Japan. I played there in 1987 and got the shit kicked out of me. Remember that very well. Still hurts. But I'm just going back in time. Are you seeing some of the sponsors really embracing the sense of the occasion and really trying to become part of the story and the party? And which one?
I just touched on the earlier point that 63 brands, the Olympic sponsor, no branding. A lot of people ask the question about what is sponsorship all about, where to invest, how much need to spend. The answer is there's no answer because depends on the brands, different goal, total different goal. The Olympic sponsors 63 sponsors. This is very much the Tokyo hosting the Olympics. It's not the national service, it's not the donation, but a lot of brands want to showcase technologies. And a lot of brands, 63 companies, it's not looking for the branding, more showcasing the technologies. Like for instance, like NVC. NVC is providing the face recognition, technologies. Accreditation, about 300,000 staff and media's accreditations. The badge, have the digital face recognition system, which NVC developed, and they want to showcase. This is what they want to achieve. So all different sponsors, each sponsor has different goals. If some sponsor want more, the sponsor for the massive, the commercial sports, FIFA World Cup, a lot of engagement, a lot of sponsorship brand activities. That's fantastic. So a lot of sponsors have different the goals. So every time a lot of sponsors asking where to spend and what's properties, but this all depends. So therefore, I don't call again that I don't want to say so much sponsorship, more partnership, and also we call ourselves. We don't call so much agency. We call up a communication solution partner, in sports. So we try to be with the brands, try to resolve, what they try to achieve using sports.
So Sabrina, you've just re-signed the ICC deal. Is that happened after the World Cup, the England one?
Yeah, we'll continue our partnership. Yeah.
For how long have you renewed for?
Until another 5 years, yeah.
And when the marketing team were going to the senior management to say, we recommend there is a renewal, which would have happened, what were the metrics that you presented to senior management that were good enough for senior management to say, because it's not a cheap sponsorship, ICC is very expensive, huge diaspora of the Indian audience in particular. What was it, do you think, that convinced them to renew?
Yeah, so first of all, the partnership or any sponsorship per se is a journey, right? Because it's just you have a good asset that you partner with, but it's how additional elements that we connect to the consumers to make it worth the money that you just pay for the sponsorship. So of course we have a lot of different metrics. We measure of course the touch points, the engagement on the different tactical campaigns that we implement, and then of course the extra media mileage that we can build on. So again, for example, this current year, we have established wishing the best team that you wish to win. So give the best blessings. We're utilizing some app for them to make a very simple blessings, because in some remote areas, the coverage is not that good. So we have to actually get the physical iPad blessings at the locations where they receive the money. So it's really good combination of offline, online, and then different campaigns. We establish the different KPIs. So again, we of course, try to learn what we have done that works. We try to replicate some of the successes and try to convince, again, this is a sport that the most of the Salvation diaspora love. We will continue to expand our new markets for, maybe for other parts of the world they like other sports. Then we'll look into, other sports that resonate well with the consumers.
So I often get accused by my mother of being really boring about sponsorship, but since I've only done sponsorship for 29 years and it's all I've ever done, I'm going to carry on. She's not here. I'm interested in a question we've not scripted at all. In fact, we haven't scripted any of this. It's just been off the cuff. But I'm interested, and I'm just going to go through the panel. If either directly in your competitive set of other brands in your world or within Formula One to choose, and again, who do you think, and because I think the audience here, we're all interested in sponsorship, just briefly with an example, who do you think does it well? I mean, you can say yourself, but that's boring. And there may be a client that you're trying to woo. You don't need to do that because we're all Chatham House rules here. I'm just interested, who's knocking it out the park right now? In the world of global sponsorship, we've identified that it's all change. It's a data world, it's a digital world, it's an immediate world, it's all about knowledge. Who's crushing it?
That's a great question. And actually, one of the brands that comes to mind is actually Allianz, right? I think, and when you see this whole combination of understanding insight, being future forward, leveraging digital, thinking of your product portfolio that could happen in a few years' time, they do a very interesting thing around drone racing in China. right? And they adopted the sport a couple of years back, and as they do drone racing, they're collecting so much of information, which is helping them think through how their insurance policies for, when autonomous drones will start doing maybe deliveries or taxi services, or using drones to look at manufacturing plants and look at insurance for those. I think it's a brilliant case study, and actually a lot of us should probably go and look at that. So Allianz actually is something that stands out for me.
If you could send that to my mother, I could maybe send that to
through a drone.
Cooney, I'm interested. I mean, you've lived in the world of sponsorship for an awfully long time. You've seen the good and the great. I'm more interested in the now. Who do you think is, again, it's the same question to each of you, because I'm always intrigued by what people think is good and why.
It's hard to say who in my position,
He can't favor one brand over the other.
Or maybe a brand that isn't part of the Dentsu. Oh no, there aren't any brands.
No, exactly. I was going to say.
You want to know the brand.
You can have a think about it. Patrick, I know, because he's Irish, he'll always have an answer.
And the answer will be a alcohol brand, right? A beer brand. And I must say that I do think that Heineken on the Champions League, not necessarily something that's happened in the last 2 years that's highly innovative, but I think it's a sponsorship that has gone on for many, many years. I think it's something that works for them on a truly global basis, which is something that's extremely difficult to do. I think it works extremely well in their positioning as a premium brand and wanting to be associated with the best of the best. I think it's incredibly well connected to their consumer, because obviously football and beer works extremely well. And I think they activated, in conjunction with UEFA and team marketing, they activated very, very well by being able to bring things like trophy tours out to different parts of the world, and also to capitalize on one of the really special and unique things about the Champions League is that they integrate on-air media broadcast sponsorship with on-ground benefits, which is a very, very powerful way to communicate with the consumers. So I think that one is an old one, but I think it works very well. One other comment on that, I think it's also a really good example of how a marriage can be a long marriage but can also evolve, because previously to the Heineken brand, it was actually the Amstel brand. So within a corporation, you can keep a long-term relationship with a very successful sponsorship platform, but you can also show how that can evolve very successfully over time.
So, Cooney, are you going to still plead the fifth?
I think nowadays I see a lot of e-commerce company in Japan. I think some people may know Rakuten is very aggressive at this moment. E-commerce company in Japan is a lot of IPO last 2 years. Rakuten, company called Rakuten, and also gaming company. Actually, a lot of JD Club in Japan, a lot of club now owned by the e-commerce gaming company. And one of the club is called Kashima Antlers. It's the Asian champion, J-League champions, Asian champions. Kashima Antlers owner, last 20 plus years was steel company, but now it's an e-commerce company. It's called Mercari. It's a new company, e-commerce company, investing a lot. So e-commerce gaming companies now is a way to go. It's a lot of, they have idea also, and they want to do a lot of activations ideas they do have. So I keep monitoring e-commerce and also the gaming the sectors to link with their sports.
And I'm going to go to Kimberly now, just to mix it up, keep you on your toes. Again, you've worked in
I think the one that I admire the most is Red Bull. I think that they are very good at online and offline. They're not committed to just one sport, so they're appealing to their entire consumer base, but it has the same theme around extreme sports or, exciting, adrenaline, all of those things. So I think they've done a very good job in building a sponsorship platform in which it appeals to a very broad audience, which they are a consumer brand, and it just ties into what they stand for. I think it totally works for me.
And Sabrina, the people either in your competitive set, or you might not want to talk about cricket, I don't know, but in terms of ICC. But did you see any of I know Uber were one of the sponsors. Were there other sponsors that you saw either ICC level or within your competitive set, or people you've gone, or you've learned from them and you're borrowing ideas from other people?
Yeah, maybe I wouldn't say competitor, but I'll just say overall experiences where I see on all different associations. I think Red Bull actually stands out quite a lot because it's an energy drink, especially in these parts of the world. I never know what is this about, why Red Bull, and even in some parts of South Asia, in India, Red Bull is wherever that they have in sports-related events, they have a quite big blast of general brand awareness building. At least it got me attracted. What is this? It's all about energy drink.
Yeah, that's interesting. Just changing it a bit, we've talked a lot about this kind of revolution, technology, how we consume, what the big screen is, what is the first screen, what's the second screen, is the second screen the first screen, all of this stuff, it's changing. And we've seen some sports that have gone into a sort of major adaptation, survive or die, and cricket's the good example, I guess, in terms of 2020 cricket that bore IPL, and look what's happened to cricket, though the purists say what's happened to cricket, and that's an argument. But I'm interested, and this is Tony, I'll start with you, Mehul, is do you think that as part of this technological advancement, and we're seeing it with the Olympics, the IOC have had to change a lot, you know, introducing new sports, etc. Do you think we're going to be seeing the age of change format because the consumer is demanding change? And give examples of what you think and how that might look to anybody who wants to chip in. I'll start with Mehul.
No, absolutely. And see, it's interesting, right? Because earlier there would be a certain demographic and a certain part of the geography in the world which was your key market. And being very well defined in that key market, you could create properties which address that, right? And you didn't really care about what happened otherwise. Now, because it's truly borderless, you could actually appeal to different kinds of audiences in different markets. And because you can play it in, and sports is all about live, right? At the end of the day, it happens only at a particular time. Unless you adapt your formats, how do you reach to those new audiences, right? So what golf has done with Golf Sixes, I think is brilliant because they've packaged it literally in that 1 hour. They're creating teams, they're bringing that spirit, they're able to create shorter formats. And sometimes it's not just about the time, it's about you can create micro experiences. So on digital, you can consume the Golf Sixes far better than 18 rounds of golf happening over 3 days. So completely, a lot of sports will have to do. I think we should not be worried whether the purity of the sport goes away. I still feel Test cricket will be as important because you want that to be the pinnacle of performance for the sports person.
So do you think Formula One may change?
I would want it to, right? I would want it to keep the core of the sport still there, that main race, but create the surround around it, which actually helps more audiences come in.
So Patrick, I'm interested. Your primary sport's been football for a long, long, long time. And it seems to be maybe I don't know if I'm right here, but I think I'm right. A lot of sports are getting challenged on format and saying you've got to innovate, you've got to move things forward. It doesn't feel that football/soccer is under that same pressure. Is that fair?
Yeah, I was going to say that I think it's very much to do with what sport you're talking about. I can see something like the Olympics, technology, all these different sports. But with football, I just don't see that. I think, in fact, I think the format of the event is so precious that if any of the administrators or the commercial people try to mess around with that, I think there would be an enormous backlash. But that, I wouldn't say that's unique to soccer, but I think it's one of the few sports that is not going to have a certain pressure.
And Cunit, what do you think at the Olympics? There are going to be some new, well, I don't think they're called exhibition sports, but obviously climbing's in there for the first time. Do you think that, in your experience, that we're going to see more sports having to evolve to stay pertinent to what used to be called the millennial is now Gen Z and is now going to be called something else, Gen A, I don't know, whatever comes next. But what it seems to me that consumerism is putting on pressure now on sport, and golf is a good example. If golf didn't change, it would die out.
I think sports should change and keep changing. Should keep evolving. You know, because of like cricket. I heard of the cricket is a test match for 5 days historically. Then 1 day and 2020. You know, more 3 hours. You know, short the version of the cricket. I think a lot of the people now is cannot watch the sports 3-4 days. So I think International Federation IF is also thinking a lot of change in the format of the sports to appeal more younger youth, the people also more digital friendly. So I'm pretty sure a lot of international federations start to change their perception, what's good and how to change to appeal to more younger generations. I think a lot of changes are valuable. For instance, badminton, table tennis. I'm pretty sure next 10 years a lot of format change, the way to show the sports is totally changed. I think the valuable a lot of change, entertainment elements. So I think I'm pretty sure our international federations now is aware of the change of format, and I think they should change next time.
And also, I guess, with the technology that exists, is whether it's camera angles and a million different sort of wizardry that Mehul knows all about that I don't, means that the entertainment element is going to be brought to life. In football, do you see, I mean, they've had VAR, that's kind of had its positive and negative comments, inevitably, all innovation does. Can you see there be any tweaks to the game? That's a tough question. From a consumer point of view, that like cricket started putting in all kind of, the umpire is virtually obsolete now, and every time they say something, they're kind of wrong. So, and then they get pilloried and they can't go home. So I'm just interested, do you see anything happening?
The short answer is no. I don't actually. And I think, what I was going to say earlier on is that I think while the format of the game won't change necessarily with soccer, certainly the way the media companies cover it is definitely evolving. It's still the 90 minutes plus, and you do have new things like VAR, but clearly what's very important for media companies now is to take clips out of that live match and feed them over their digital channels, their social channels, in parallel. So it's more to do with how that format, which will stay the same, I believe, is then cut up and used by the media companies and conveyed to their fans. I think that will evolve, if that makes sense.
I would add to that I'm thinking about some American sports as well. The core sport, the game, the rules aren't going to change. They're not going to change in baseball. They're not going to change in basketball. They're not going to change in football. But how you engage, how you consume. I mean, I laughed. You're talking about TV. TV doesn't matter. It's a video, and whether you get it on your tablet, your computer, your TV, or whatever, wherever, whenever you want it, it is video. But you're going to engage beforehand. If you think about Formula E, it's about the Fan Fest, so you can actually help your preferred team or driver prior to a race by going online and voting for your driver or your team, and they get some extra power during the race. So there's all of these other elements around these core sporting events that I think that's what's going to change. I don't think the rules of the game are going to change, or the time that they run, right? It's all the other things. And you think about umpires and replays and, looking at the data and the statistics around certain umpires, and have they, given too many bad calls. I mean, all of those things are being judged by the fans.
One thing that I came to know that is more interesting is women's cricket now is getting more popular. So I think that we're also looking into this type of relationship to engage with the female cricketers.
Is that an exclusive? Did we hear it here first? That's fantastic. All that matters. Just very quickly, because we've got 2 minutes and 52 seconds and lunch, and no one wants to get in the way of a hungry Singapore crowd when it's lunchtime. But just interested, very quickly, do you think that we've sort of covered this great revolution that's happening? We've probably ascertained that sponsorship is probably more valuable than it was 10, certainly 15 years ago from a sponsor point of view. Do you think, therefore, that the sponsorship valuation model needs to change too? i.e. how it's being priced up is obsolete, he says.
Is there a model? I mean, I've never, I think the answer to that very simply is I don't think there's ever been a kind of currency in our business, right? I mean, if you're selling airtime, there's always been a currency, but that just doesn't exist in sponsorship. So I think it will evolve, but evolve from what?
Well, from a nebulous television
We used to argue about this. Do you remember in the old days?
No. I think it's just accountability will go up that much more. So that's where I see a little bit more difference, that with so much transparency coming in and so much of data coming in, so much of options to create different ways.
So what you're saying is sponsors will want more defined, quantifiable feedback in order to make the business case, and it's beholden on the rights holder or the agents of the rights holder
to create that,
to give them
but
that.
It goes back to the objectives too, right? If your objective is you're launching a new brand, you want a global awareness in 6 months, then that's one evaluation. But if you want to build customer relationships, so a lot of it goes back to what you're trying to achieve in the first place.
True.
Yeah.
I mean, I think it's fascinating. I was going to wonder if anybody in the audience wanted to ask a question, but actually, I don't want any questions. It disturbs the flow. So sorry if you had a question. You can't answer it. Email it to Jasper, and I'm sure someone will answer it eventually. Look, it is lunchtime. I think it's been fascinating. I genuinely think this is the sort of stuff I could talk about all day long, which would then prevent you from your lunch. So I won't. So I think just sort of give it up to Mehul, Cooney, Patrick, Sabrina, and Kimberly. I think it's been a great chat, and thank you all very much.
Thank you, Charles.
Thank you.